Thank you very much for bearing with us. It's been a long day for everyone. I think loads and loads of really interesting talks, loads and loads of really fruitful conversations. I think we should about to start our second to last piece. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Becky Holmes, who is the author of Keanu Reeves is Not in Love with You.
All right. That was more than I'd asked for, but thank you. I can't believe how many people have bothered to come back in. I thought I was going to be on kind of the graveyard shift, so thank you everyone for bothering to come in, particularly when there's wine out there. This is kind of a weird experience for me. So normally when I do talks, I don't know that many people in the room, and this is really hard because there's so many people that I love and admire in this room that it's much more nerve-wracking than it normally would be. But I will do my best. So before I got really interested and wrote a book about romance fraud, I didn't know much about it. I was like everybody else in the UK, well, worldwide in fact, didn't really know that much, wasn't that interested because it hadn't happened to me. My interest came about because of a load of fraudsters sliding into my DMs on Twitter. So that is me. I actually have 10,000 less followers now because Elon Musk obviously owns Twitter and has suddenly become the president of the United States. And since that happened, people have been leaving Twitter in their droves, but not fraudsters, unfortunately. So I set this up during lockdown. I was very, very bored. It's called Death to Spinach because I didn't know I was going to be doing this, and it's just kind of stuck with me, and now I'm just referred to as the spinach woman. So that was what I did. Now, I set that up, and within a few weeks, there was just this influx of really handsome soldiers that slid into my inbox. It wasn't just soldiers, it was oil rig workers, doctors, pilots, anybody that's kind of sexy, they were in my inbox straight away. And what I will say is, if it had been just one, I might well have responded to that because I might have seen it and thought, oh, I'm bored, I'll have a chat with a nice-looking young man. I was very fortunate in that because I got dozens, all the same, and some of them using the same picture as one another, I could smell a rat. But anyway, yes, so I soon realised that I could cure my boredom throughout COVID by wasting as much of their time as I possibly could. And it got really popular on Twitter. So before I get serious about romance fraud, which I am unfortunately going to have to do, I am going to tell you about my favourite interaction. So this guy always called himself Zeltina, seemed to forget that he'd got a first name. Now, the reason that my presentation is called what it is, the oil rig worker versus the orthopaedic surgeon, is because when I started talking to him, he told me he worked on an oil rig. And he's very, very clever because he's now an orthopaedic surgeon. So he's either incredibly talented, very, very busy, or he's had a last-minute career change. So we'd been talking for about 48 hours, and he was immediately in love with me, understandably. And somebody did a really loud snort then, as if that's so unbelievable. Thank you. So he told me that he wanted to spend some time with me. He wanted to get to know me in person, and he'd like to take some time from his oil rig to come and speak to me. But he needed £3,200 to do that. That's what his company were going to charge him. Why 3,200? I don't know. I would have rounded it down or up, but anyway. And he asked me whether he could have this money, and I didn't answer him for a little while, and this is the conversation that ensued. You have not talked about the fee after telling you how much. Don't forget that I love you, now and forever. Hope to see you soon. Remain. Bless. So I've decided to come to your oil rig. myself, going to hire a boat. Now, I don't think he was expecting this. Why risk your life? Please, you can't. If you're not a worker, here, you are not allowed to visit the rig, the location. I mean, the high sea is miles away from land. It will take a helicopter 1.5 days. Try your best. If you can get the fee when I get home, I will pay you back. Love you. I'm at sea, Zaltinus. As I said, I'm coming for you. No, I was worried that he wouldn't believe that I was on my way, so I just happened to have that picture. You have to stop, please. How can you look for me in the sea? Why risk your life? And there is only one answer to that, because I love you. I will message you shortly. Honey, what sea are you? Don't get me scared. I love you so much and I don't want to lose you. Honey, come down from that boat. I've told you, you can only come here with helicopter, not with both. Okay, I'll try helicopter. And just in case he didn't think I was serious, I happened to have that as well. So this went on for a really, really long time, and he got more and more confused, and I was having more and more fun, and honestly, I think it was weeks. I could do an entire presentation just of that conversation. At one point, I had this massive cuddly moomin, and I was saying that it was attacking me outside my flat. It was incredible. So people were finding what I was doing on Twitter really funny, and it was getting retweeted by celebrities, comedians, journalists. So my following grew, as did the number of fraudsters, so I was able to do more posts. But as an unintended consequence, I was contacted by dozens of people who had actually been a victim of romance fraud, men and women, and none of them had spoken to anybody else about what it was that they'd been through. So throughout lockdown, I kind of became, I guess, a listening ear, a bit of a sounding board to some people who hadn't told anyone else. And that includes friends and family and banks and police. Anybody that we would normally advise them to tell, they hadn't done. And I started to realise how misunderstood the crime is and how misrepresented it is and how we make terrible assumptions about the victims of romance fraud. I mean, we do it with fraud anyway, but romance fraud in particular. So I made it a mission, and I started learning everything I could. I interviewed victims, police, banks, academics, charities, even fraudsters. And I've had a few death threats along the way. So I want to tell you, very briefly, about 3 cases of victims where they were failed. Now, these are all real. I interviewed them myself. I went to their houses. So Francesca, she's in her 50s. She is very clever. She's very successful. She's got an incredible job. She had a good social life. 2 grown-up sons that she's got a great relationship with. This woman is no fool. She went on a dating site. Her friends encouraged her. They said, oh, you haven't had a man for ages. What's the worst that can happen? So over, I think it was 4 months, she sent £120,000 over to 3 different banks in Antwerp. She remortgaged her house to do it. She borrowed money from friends, family, even somebody that worked for her. And the bank never asked a question. So at one point, one of the amounts she sent was £36,000. And she did it in a branch. And the person said, OK. And it was ticked. No one asked anything. During the time that this was going on, she told me that she was in John Lewis. And she went to buy something for 200 quid. And the bank rang her and said, is that you buying some sheets? 200 quid. So they were on the case, but when it came to transferring £36,000 to a bank in Antwerp, and this is a woman who at the most had sent £1,000 to one of her sons at a time. So being a very smart, tenacious woman, she contacted her bank, who said, no, you can sod off, actually, it's nothing to do with us. So she then went to the Ombudsman. Now, she had a terrible time with it, but she was lucky in that she is so tenacious, she is so determined. She went over and over this with the Ombudsman, and eventually they ruled that her bank had to pay her back plus 8% interest. Now, this is pre-October, so it would have been a slightly different story, but I think it's still kind of, the point remains the same. She had to fight for this. The bank didn't want to help her. She had to fight with the Ombudsman. She told me that if the bank had offered her a very fraction of that money, she would have taken it. But her spending habits were completely ignored. Now, Sue is the one who has always upset me the most, because when we spoke, she was in her 70s and she had stage 4 cancer. She started speaking to somebody on Twitter, and she was sending him gift cards. And that was fine. She could afford to send the gift cards. Then he wanted cash. So she started sending small amounts of money out to an account in Nigeria. Excuse me. Things got kind of more intense between her and this person, and she sent him a £10,000 transaction through online banking. No questions asked. The second time, she went into branch and asked to send £10,000. And the cashier said, do you know this person? And Sue said, yes, of course I do. And I do just want to make the point here that there is no point asking a victim of romance fraud whether they know the person they're sending money to. They believe they're in a relationship. Of course they think they know them. Victims of romance fraud have very, very often been groomed. Now, I know we talked earlier about the word grooming, but they've been told what to say to banks. She knew that they were going to ask her that, so she had the appropriate response. Of course I know him. The cashier also asked her this while there was a massive long line of people behind her. So Sue just thought, oh, God, yes, I know him. And off she went. She just wanted to get out of there. But she was an interesting woman because she told me that she walked into that bank wanting to be stopped. She was really hoping that somebody would pull her aside and say, I think this might be fraud. And she was absolutely devastated that they didn't do it, but she didn't have the strength to go out and start a process of reporting by herself. She needed that encouragement. So she was asked the wrong questions. So now these guys, it's not a romance fraud, but I spoke at a literary festival, and they came to see me. They'd read the book, and they wanted to talk to me about what had happened to them. And I think it's a really interesting one. So they clicked on an advert, which was for over 65s, and it was to invest in a new platform. They spent £20,000 over about 2 months of really confusing phone calls and transactions. And the fraudster kept them on the phone, and he was being more and more confusing. And at one point he was saying, if you don't do this now, you're going to lose your investment. You've got to do this now, otherwise this has all been for nothing. Not only will you lose all the money you've made, but it will be everything. And you don't want that, do you, Ray and Debbie? No, you don't. You're not that silly. So when the bank finally cottoned on as to what was happening, they asked them to go into their local branch. So they did that, where the police were waiting for them, who accused them of being part of a fraudulent gang. And it was a good tense couple of hours while they tried to convince a room full of banking officials and police that they weren't actually fraudsters. Traumatising for anybody, but for two people in their kind of 70s and 80s, to go through that is absolutely appalling. And of course, the first thing they did when they got home is transfer all of their money away from that bank and into a different one. They blamed the victim. And I would say it's not just financial institutions that blame the victims, it's human beings as well. Every time you see something in the media about a victim of romance fraud, everybody piles on and say how they're gullible, they're stupid. Why did they think that they were so attractive to people anyway? A lot of people will have seen the Brad Pitt AI fraud from the woman in France. The media pounced on this woman. They called her stupid, gullible. Some of the headlines in the media were absolutely disgusting, and she ended up trying to take her own life and ended up in a psychiatric ward. And that's the real cost of what happens. So, I used to be in an abusive relationship. And when I was interviewing victims, I sort of thought about these similarities. They were telling me about what happens between victims of romance fraud and victims of domestic abuse. And I remember being very excited that I'd come up with this. And a few days later, I had lunch with Dr. Liz Carter, and I said, oh, guess what? And I told her about this, and it turns out that she'd actually written a paper on it already, and she was lovely, but it was so cringy. I felt like I'd sitting down in front of Germaine Greer, and I said, oh, just this thing called feminism. Fortunately, she didn't make me feel like that. So I'm going to use my own experiences to demonstrate what these are, so I'm not stealing anything. So when someone is abusing you, the last thing you want anyone to do is to know. The abuser does not want you to know, does not want anyone to know either, because they're going to try and get you away. And this is the same with fraud. You know, a romance fraudster doesn't want people knowing, because they know that anybody is going to go in there and say, that person is trying to get your money, and they're going to try and pull you away. So it's commonplace for abusers and fraudsters to isolate their victims from their friends and family. So in my case, my ex would say to me, do you know what, you're a different person when you come back from seeing your friends. You are not nice when you've seen them. And he would do it when I saw my mum as well. You do realise that your mum doesn't like me. This is tearing us apart. And eventually you think, oh, you know, okay, my friends, they've all got their own lives. My mum's got her own life. I'm with this guy. He loves me. I'll choose him. So it's important to know that it doesn't just happen over a week. This is a sustained effort. So people are isolated. And it's done very, very cleverly through coercive control. It's not just somebody saying, all right, love, stop talking to your mum. This is weeks, months of coercive control. Gaslighting. So this is a massive problem in abusive and fraudulent relationships. I remember thinking that I was going absolutely crazy. I was questioning myself, blaming myself, apologising for things that I hadn't done, as it turned out. And I spent the best part of a month in a psychiatric unit towards the end of my relationship. And, you know, I'm out, lots of therapy, etc., but I won't ever be the same again. And fraudsters are amazing at gaslighting. They have their victims feeling exactly like I did, which is that they're the only person that can save you. No one else will understand, and no one else will put up with you. So you stay with them. This is one of the worst things for me, and when I look back on it, I kind of cringe about this as well. So there was a time my ex broke a table in this rage, and he was so annoyed at me because I'd made him break a table that he didn't speak to me for days, and I was kind of creeping round him, trying to get him to talk to me, and he wouldn't because I'd made him do this. When he did finally decide to speak to me, I was so grateful that I rushed out and bought him a takeaway. And I look back and I think, what was I doing? But I've heard from so many victims who they've said, I've got no more money to give. I don't have anything. I'm really sorry. And the fraudster goes offline. And this can happen for hours, days, weeks, even months. So you've got the victim at home, like messaging, ringing, where is he? What's going on? Is he safe? Now, when that fraudster gets back in touch, the victim thinks, thank goodness for that. And they find a way to send money. So money they don't have, whether it means suddenly they decide to borrow it. One of the victims I spoke to for the book pawned her mum's jewellery when her fraudster got back in touch. So I guess you could say this is probably quite an obvious one. No, that's not happening to me. I wouldn't be so silly. How dare you say that? I used to say that to my friends when they talked to me about my ex-partner, and I've heard so many victims of romance fraud say the same thing initially. When people try and say something to them, well, no, it's so ridiculous. I've seen people like that, and I don't fit that stereotype. How dare you? They say it to friends, they say it to people in banks, they say it to the police, they even say it to therapists. So not only does the denial mean that it's hard to get through to the victim, but actually if they're still in that relationship, it can strengthen the bond between the fraudster and the victim because it goes along with this narrative of, you know, no one else understands us. When a victim finally does accept what's happened, you can be pretty sure they've got very little confidence left. They've lost confidence in their own judgment. So not just in terms of who a suitable partner is, but all aspects of life. They often beat themselves up so much about what they think that they've allowed to happen to them. Some people get their confidence back over time, but some people are scarred for years. And I've spoken to so many people who haven't gone into a new relationship, even though they might be over the fraud, they don't quite trust themselves to be in another relationship. And shame. It's not surprising when you look at the victim shaming that happens in this country, particularly in the media, as I say. The last thing that victims of romance fraud want to do is speak to their bank or the police because we don't make it an easy thing to do. In terms of domestic abuse, we have got a lot better. We've cut down on the she was asking for it narrative. But in romance fraud, that's all we ever say. She was asking for it. She should have known better. We need to get on top of that because romance fraud isn't going anywhere. So I've just got 3 things, really, that I'd like you to take away. The first is that, my God, is there a lack of support in this country? So there is not one single funded victim support organisation for romance fraud victims, specifically. I have the very great honour of calling Anna Rowe, a personal friend of mine, who together with Cecilia Fielhoy has set up an organisation called Love Said. And this is for victims of romance fraud. But not only that, it also tries to educate friends and family how to deal with it and offers courses to police, banks, people who think that they should understand it better. Now, it's not funded. So I know Anna very well. She's a mum, she works, and every single other waking second is dedicated to this. I've spoken to Anna when she's been in floods of tears because she's spoken to someone who was going to kill themselves. So if there's anybody in here with some money in their budget, for God's sake, can you just put some towards an organisation that is actually doing something? Okay, so I know there's lots of techie people in here, so I apologise, but technology is not enough. You can't approach a victim of an emotional crime with a chatbot. They want a human being. They're less trusting of technology now anyway, and chances are that the way they met their scammer was online. So let's face it, they're not going to be best disposed to technology. And fraud warnings are becoming like terms and conditions. Everyone just clicks through. No one reads them. I mean, probably people in this room do, but I can tell you normal people don't read them. I certainly don't. The reason that romance fraud is so successful is because it's, yes, a financial crime, but it's a crime of the heart as well. And human beings would have died out. We have this need to love and to be loved. So we make these connections. And no amount of technology can put friction in between somebody finding a partner. It just doesn't happen. So, language. Again, I'm going to shout out to Dr. Liz Carter, who does a ton of work on language. But I'm just going to pick up on one phrase that I hate. And I'm sorry to say, I've heard so many people use it up on stage today, and every time I went, and that is fall for. You fall for fraud, boo. When do you ever say, oh, God, I went out last night and I fell for a mugging? Or, oh, I went out and my house, I fell for a burglary. You don't, because it's considered a crime serious enough that somebody did it to you. Whereas fraud and romance fraud, apparently you just walk into it. You fell for it. It's something that you had control of. It's not. It's a crime like any other, and it deserves to be, the victims of it deserve to be spoken to with as much respect as any other crime. So, the last thing I want to say, excuse me, is that romance fraud, it can happen to anyone. Fraudsters don't care your gender, your race, your culture, your sexuality, your age. They could not care less. And the common denominator between victims of romance fraud is not stupidity, it's kindness. These people, I've been in relationships with somebody and they want to help their partner. I would like to think that my partner would like to help me. I would like to think that everybody's partner would help them. That's what these people have done. They have helped their partner, and yet they're vilified for it. And I think we should all perhaps think about judging other people a little bit less. And that's it.